Before I started a business, I worked in tech in my 20s and I was making about $140,000 per year in the year that I quit my job, which is the equivalent of a $181,000 salary in today's dollars. And by all counts, I thought I had made it. I was making well over 6 figures per year in my mid-20s in America, and I was on my path to becoming wealthy, or so I thought. I was working long hours and weekends at a fast-growing startup in the heart of Silicon Valley, and at its height, it was worth over $5 billion in valuation. And I was surviving the job despite having the job becoming more of just my entire life, and sometimes I'd even have to wake up at 4 in the morning just to monitor revenue metrics. Even though from the outside looking in, you probably would have thought to yourself, man, this guy has it made, I ultimately came to a few realizations that led me to quit my job. And now that I've been out of corporate America for about 7 or 8 years, I think this is a great time to share with you guys the realizations that I've made, reflect on how I was feeling at the time, and how things have changed since. The first realization that made me quit my job was I realized that I was replaceable, and ultimately the company did not care for my well-being. As of recent, there have been a lot of layoffs in the tech industry as well as many other industries. I have a lot of friends that are laid off right now, and I've experienced personally at least 3 cycles of layoffs. Layoffs are often cyclical, and they also target people regardless of their performance or their loyalty to the company. In fact, in the stock market world, sometimes we as investors actually relish a company that will do some layoffs because that means that their profit margins are going to go up because their costs are going to go down. This article from CNBC in December of 2023 actually sums it up quite well. So the headline was, quote, "Meta's stock is wrapping up a record year spurred by cost cuts." Now, if we read further on in the article, we actually see that it says, quote, "Meta's initial round of layoffs in 2022 helped kickstart the stock's rebound." Then in February, Meta revealed that its total expenses for 2023 would be in the range of 89 to 95 billion, which was lower than its 2023 outlook of 94 to 100 billion. The shares, they shot up 76% in the first quarter. Essentially, Meta laid off about 25% of their workforce through 3 separate layoffs throughout the past few years, and guess what? Their stock went up. And the reality is that when you are a part of a large workforce at a very large company like that, unfortunately, you are ultimately just a number. People who have been at companies since day one, worked there for years or possibly even decades, and even sacrificed a lot of their own time and family time for the company, they can be canned for no regard for their well-being. The other truth you need to know is that every company is structured to make money, and so therefore every employee has to have an ROI, and they need to be ROI positive in order for the company to keep growing. Any profitable company will be willing to pay their employees, say, X salary, and they expect a 2X, 3X, or even up to a 10X return on that salary. When it came to my own personal situation, I saw a lot of my friends get laid off for no reason other than the fact that they were just trying to cut costs. And while the company will try to cite poor performance or otherwise, sometimes the painful truth is that you just get let go irrespective of how well you're doing.
Unfortunately, today will be your last day with the organization.
So the idea here is that never feel like you owe your company anything, any loyalty or anything like that. Obviously, you want to stay in a place that is treating you well. However, you should always know your worth, and if you're not getting paid what you are worth, you might want to shop around. Oftentimes, these employers won't give you a raise just automatically. You have to go out there and ask for it yourself. And that's an easy and effective way to grow your own wealth is through something called career development strategy. And I always think that you should be leveraging your existing job and your existing skills to try to get something better. If you're able to increase your quality of life, your compensation, or your work title just by simply asking for it or perhaps switching jobs, then it might be something worth doing. The other big realization I had before I quit my job, especially as the company started to grow in the thousands of employees, was that if I truly wanted to be wealthy, I needed to actually own a piece of equity or a piece of the company. I started to look around at all the success stories in Silicon Valley, as well as on the internet for all the most successful entrepreneurs and business owners, and the one thing that they all had in common was that they either had a business, they sold the business, or perhaps they had some ownership of a company. While I was making a pretty good salary at this tech job, I did the math on what my equity and stock options were worth, and the truth is that it wasn't enough to make a meaningful impact in my life. Unless the company actually got to a $20 or $30 billion valuation, those stock options probably were just a nice bonus at the end of the day. And actually, if we fast forward 4 years in 2020, the company was actually only worth about $500 million, so 10% of its peak peak valuation. And because $500 million of a valuation was less than the total amount of fundraising that the company did initially, what actually ended up happening was all the preferred stockholders, they got paid out first, and then the common stockholders, aka the employees, they got nothing. So in order to build wealth, or truly generational wealth, what I realized was like I needed to get in at a company at the very ground floor, get a larger percentage of equity, and then hope that company goes to the moon. Another thing that I could do was take on some more risk by starting my own thing, and then therefore I could bet on myself. What I decided was, because I was living at home and I had a lot of money saved up, I would start my own business, and I would give up at least a year or two of my life to see if I could actually make it work. It was just a couple years later that Naval Ravikant, a Silicon Valley thinker and the co-founder of AngelList, he came out with his famous tweet storm on how to get rich, as well as an accompanying podcast. And it actually just reinforced my realization that I had in the years prior. So let's actually listen to what he has to say.
People seem to think that you can create wealth and make money through work, and it's probably not going to work. There are many reasons for that, but the most basic is just that your inputs are very closely tied to your outputs. In almost any salaried job, even one that's paying a lot per hour, like a lawyer or a doctor, you're still putting in the hours, and every hour you get paid. So what that means is when you're sleeping, you're not earning. When you're retired, you're not earning. When you're on vacation, you're not earning. And you can't earn non-linearly.
So what he's saying here is that in order to truly be wealthy, we need to figure out a way where our inputs, such as our time, are not closely related to our outputs. He says that you can do this in a few different ways, but essentially what he says is that you need to either own a product, a business, or some type of intellectual property. Now, another way that I think you can do it is that if you have a normal job, you have some great stock options at the company that you are working for. So I'm not saying you have to start a business. In fact, many people are making a really great living by owning some stock options at a company that is performing well over time. For example, if you're like a VP at NVIDIA or something crazy like that right now, you're probably making way more than the typical business owner would, even if that business owner is very successful. The idea here is that maybe you were a little less in control of your destiny when it came to that. However, if you were smart enough or lucky enough to position yourself at a company with a great outcome eventually, then you can also get wealthy that way. I also want to share that if you're thinking about starting a business, it's not actually for everybody. Everybody has a different situation. They have a different family situation. They might have debts and also dependents. And so it really depends on your own risk tolerance and also where you are financially. Quitting your job to pursue entrepreneurship might not actually be a prudent thing, especially if you have, let's say, like a mortgage payment or dependents that rely on your income. Personally, I was able to save up a full year worth of my emergency fund prior to quitting, and I had a bunch of money in investments as well. This allowed me to quit my job completely and focus on entrepreneurship, but this might not work for you. If you're interested in entrepreneurship, I think a less risky way to go about it is to try to build up something on the side while you still have a job, get some validation for it, and then decide if you want to go all in on that idea later. In life, as well as in investing, I think you need to manage your risk appropriately. So what that means for me is that in my case, I didn't think that quitting my job and also taking on a year worth of trying out entrepreneurship was actually a big risk. Objectively, I didn't think it was too big of a risk in my eyes, because even if I failed after trying for 1 to 2 years, I would have been in the same spot that I started. The next realization I had was that while I was making a really good income, my time wasn't my own. You see, typically when you work for a company, let's say you're a full-time employee, you work 8 hours a day or about 40 hours a week. That's only 35% of your waking hours. Now, obviously, I am assuming that you sleep 8 hours per day, so that means of 112 waking hours, you work 40 of them. That's about 35%, and I think that's a reasonable bargain, right? You're trading 35% of your waking hours in order to live and be able to financially afford everything that you need to. But when you're at a startup that's trying to scale like crazy, oftentimes a lot more is asked of you than just 40 hours a week, and sometimes I can get up to 60, 70, or even 80 hours per week. The culture at my job was to do long hours and show face, and oftentimes I would show up to work at 10:30 in the morning and I wouldn't leave until 9 or 10 at night. The other thing is that since I worked on the live operations team, so we were monitoring revenue 24/7, oftentimes I would have to wake up early on a Saturday or Sunday at 4 in the morning to monitor revenue. Essentially, I didn't have much freedom of time. I could be asked at any given day, at any given time, to change something on the back end in order to hopefully improve revenue for the entire company. And because I was a salaried employee and not an hourly employee, it doesn't mean that I would get overtime for working those hours that were outside of my normal work hours. So if you actually calculated my hourly rate for my $140,000 per year salary at the time, I don't think it was as glamorous as you might have thought it was. So I basically lacked freedom of time. That was my biggest realization. I was at my employer's beck and call, and I didn't get to choose when and how I wanted to work. I was promised that I would learn a ton of skills in return for spending all this time at work, and and that was true for some time, but then it did kind of hit a plateau. In reality, a lot of extra hours were just kind of spent sitting around waiting for someone else to make a decision in order for us to do our work. And I guess investment bankers and lawyers might actually experience something like this as well. Sometimes they're just in the office and they're waiting for a stakeholder to make a decision about, let's say, a pitch book before they get started. And I think many people are like this. Many people are willing to trade their younger years for the prospects of a better career later on. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think part of being wealthy is that eventually you do get some sort of freedom of time. Hopefully by making some career choices early on in your life, if you are deciding to sacrifice some of your younger years for later, that you get that freedom of time later. My last thought here is that because I was actively choosing to prioritize my career early on, I was essentially allowing money to control or dictate my actions. I became fascinated with money, and the thing is that I thought money made the world go round. I did like making it, I liked talking about it, I liked managing and optimizing it. It's probably a large reason as to why I started this channel. But at the root of my fascination with money, I realized it's just about freedom. I wanted the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do at any given time and not be stressed out about money. What I realize now though is that you don't actually need that much money in order to have freedom, as long as you're not overinflating your lifestyle. I have friends that make a good salary, but they end up getting a car that's way too expensive for them, a house that they have no business getting a mortgage on, and on top of that, they have a kid or two. At that point, they have to work that job, whatever their job they're doing, in order to actually fund their life and make sure that they're maintaining their overhead. In order to have money not control our lives, dictate our time, or dictate our actions, I think by living below our means, that's our best chance at getting freedom. That's why every time I take on a big recurring expense, especially if it's a big one like a car payment, I'm always thinking about it in a yearly term. So I'm multiplying my monthly payment by 12 and figuring out what percentage of my income that's actually taking up.
It's a diesel truck.
Great. It costs $1,275 a month.
Obviously, it's easier said than done when it comes to living below your means, but if you're able to find things that you enjoy that don't cost that much money, then you'll see some benefits in terms of financial stability as well as financial freedom. Thanks for watching. I know that this video was a little bit different than the videos that we put out on the channel, but I wanted to share my rationale for quitting my job back in the day. It may not be the right decision for everybody, but if you are thinking about starting a business, you want to make sure that the risk that you're taking on by doing so is not putting you in a really tough financial spot in case it fails. Taking calculated risks can be worth it, and I hope that my journey inspired you and perhaps resonated with you at least a little bit. If you are interested in making money online, I did make a video about the 4 levels of making money online that I will leave right here for you guys, and that's a really great video if you want to learn more about my journey as well as all the different ways that you can make money on the internet. I'll see you guys in that video or perhaps a future one on this channel. All right, peace.